There was a specific plant that grew on Zernexton that would have very profound effects on the galaxy. Zernexton was mostly a desert planet with one massive continent with several parallel mountain ranges, splitting the landmass down the middle where the major of the planet's biodiversity thrived. Along with predictable seasons, the mountains collected water in valleys, lakes, and higher up as snow. The excess water was distributed through the desert with winding rivers trying to find the ocean. The season's patterns often flooded the shallow parts of the land under several inches during the wettest parts. Extremes of heat and flooding made it very hard for plants to grow, except one. There was a single plant that had found a way to collect as much water as possible during the wet season, called swell rods. They stood anywhere from 5 to 10 feet high, with a few rare ones reaching up to 15 feet, and grew patches along the rivers, looking very much like Earth's asparagus with a red tint. When the opportunity of water came, they would suck it up through the sturdy root system, and the plants would swell up and collect as much as possible. When the waters receded, to keep creatures away from the stored water, the rods would concentrate the water with a coagulant, and the outer membranes of the plant would produce an irritant. As it turns out, the process of coagulating the stored water infused it with high levels of natural ethanol. When the local sapiens, the Zren, a race of manta-like creatures, came down from the mountain bastions and examined the swell rods, they found that red gelatin in the centers could be harvested and used as an effective fuel for fire. From then on, the swell rods were essential to the way of life. Farmers moved from the mountain valleys to turn the riversides into well-maintained fields of the swell rods, called the red gel pyrofuel. Zren used it to fuel fires, as a light source, and in many other useful ways. When the industrial age came along, it was the main source of energy. The red gel was refined and experimented with, finding more ways it could help the people of Zernexton. Eventually, when concentrated even more, it was used to help the Zren break the atmosphere in their early rockets. Not too soon, they made contact with the other spacefaring races. Of course, there were many other technologies and resources the Zren had at their disposal, but the swell rods and their subsequent red gel was a unique and prized product that the Zren capitalized on. As an easy fuel source, and a relatively cheap one at that, the red gel was sold by the barrel, and the selling was good. Spaceships used it as their main fuel source for the in-system thrusters, as the faster-than-light engines used other more exotic fuel sources. As time went by, the Zren became a powerful spacefaring empire. Time went by, wars broke out, empires that ruled hundreds of planets rose and fell, and a new species popped into the galactic picture. A race of creatures with 2 legs, 2 arms, and an eccentric view of the universe. Humans, they were called, and they were from a death world. Due to the high gravity of their planet, they were usually shorter and denser than most of the galaxy's creatures, and were known to be able to work harder and longer. Not to mention the humans would, for the most part, try to pack bond with any crew they joined, regardless of species, and were successful at it too. Morale and crew effectiveness went up as well. And when things went wrong, it was usually better to have a human close on hand than not have one. It was for these many reasons Krenzak wanted one on his ship. Also, he just wanted to meet one. And so Krenzak, captain of the Alfrond, after heading home to Zernexton, reloaded his long hauler with barrels of raw red gel, and a lesser assortment of other products. He ordered a short jump to Sargov trading station to hopefully pick up a human crewmate. He got 2 crew and a passenger. Carlos and Sarah were certified engineers, and were looking forward to finally working on an alien spaceship. David was a doctor and biologist who brought passage as the ship's cargo was heading to the same destination, a new colony planet on the southern fringe. Taking on passengers for a freighter like his ship was typical business. When your ship's storage hold is roughly 1.5 miles long, you can earn a decent spending chip converting a small percentage of space into living quarters and rent them out for the duration of the voyage. And with David being a practicing doctor, he could help pay his way by working in the infirmary. This was going to be a long trip. To get from Zernexton to the southern fringe was going to take several different warp jumps and maneuvering to avoid dangerous sectors of space. They were going to have to take the long way around to avoid crossing into Gentrica and the Havron territories. Both were intelligent insect-like hive species that bordered each other, and had once been allies, did open trading with each other in the wider galaxy. Until an unknown incident between one hive queen or another happened, and now both sides are trying their hardest to genocide the other. No communication to either side has been successful, and it has been a raging stalemate for the past 20 galactic cycles. Best to go around. If the warp winds are on our side, the trip should only take 5 to 6 months. And so, with my crew of 117 crew members, 35 passengers, and metric tons of supplies and products bound for a colony planet on the edge of the galaxy. Within the first 2 weeks, Carlos and Sarah had the basic know-how on the main engines in the back of the ship. The chief engineer was a bulbous crab creature about 4 feet high, with 8 legs and arms, and a dozen smaller creatures of the same race were quite impressed. While all independent, the Rocknids still had hive receptors and could privately relay orders and information to each other, which made them extremely effective. They would swarm up and down massive machinery with their power tools, infopads, and clattering carapace, run diagnostics, identify the problem, pull out parts and replace them with new or different ones, and finally skitter down and run a last calibration test, then move on to the next item of business. Carlos and Sarah soon found themselves a part of the organised chaos, the universal translators instantly translating the rapid-fire chirps and clicks of the Rocknids into precise, quick sentences, and the 2 humans threw themselves into their work. In the meantime, David was happily getting his hands familiar with the tools and delicate instruments of the multi-species medical ward. He had gone to school on Earth for this very job, but actually getting to learn and work across from an alien was David's dream job. The head doctor was what looked like a cross between a jellyfish and an octopus, a somewhat bulbous head and 2 large black pearl eyes on the side of his head. The rest of his body consisted mostly of floating tentacles. Being evolved from a water world, the integration of nano-antigrav and atmosphere condensers in his own body to allow mobility and optimal oxygen intake were a necessity for the Octuli to effectively interact with those outside their domain. Being highly intelligent after acquiring the technology to leave their homeworld, they slowly but surely cornered the market on nanotech. They communicated through bioluminescence, patterns, and overall colour changes in their skin. The translator did his job conveying the messages. Overall, Captain Krenzak was pleased with how his human crew and occupants adjusted into his ship, and after a month they were fully incorporated into the daily goings-on. They worked hard and got along very well with the rest of the crew. The humans would be gathered around during mealtimes and ask question after question about Earth and the terrifying creatures there. They would tell stories about ancient humans and the wonders they built, or the wars and battles they fought. The aliens all listened with rapt attention, some with horror, others pure amazement. The only complaints from the humans were that the food was bland and boring. Even though they had several types of fruits, vegetables, an assortment of breads, and even a few selections of meat for the few carnivores on board the ship, Captain Krenzak couldn't really help them. 3 months travelling brought them to the next jump point. It was across a derelict system they had popped back into real space in. Its sun spontaneously spewed out a massive flare thousands or so galactic cycles ago. The planet, that had a blossoming colony on its surface, had its atmosphere ripped away, and while a good portion of the inhabitants made it off-world in time, there were those who were unable to make it out in time. It was never repopulated due to the instability of the sun. This wasn't the captain's first route choice, but due to the warring hive minds, this was the quickest path through the rough patch of space. It was during this time, in between jumps, that David pulled Carlos into the medical ward. "I just found out something crazy," he said. "What would that be?" replied Carlos. "I was going to watch Tango with Sarah in a little bit." David rolled his eyes and slid the door shut behind him. "This will be the 3rd time you would have watched that movie in 3 months, dude." I know. Just that there is not that much to do when not on shift. Spaceships are cool and all, but man, I'm bored." "Then you're going to like this. I have just been as bored as you and have been messing around with this chemical analyzer machine. I've been putting random stuff through it and isolating compounds and such." David walked up to a white and silver machine that appeared to Carlos like a soda machine, and a photocopier had a baby. "Now, watch this. This is pyrofuel," he said, and pulled up a plate of a red jiggling cube, sliced off a sliver, and placed it in the machine. The machine hummed, and the screen lit up and displayed a bunch of chemical formulas, and other info that Carlos couldn't understand, regardless of his translator. Then David cut off another piece and popped it into his mouth, chewed a second and swallowed. "What are you?" Carlos started. "It's fine." David coughed a little and breathed through his mouth. "I've never been good with spicy stuff." "I still don't know what the hell you're doing." "This stuff is perfectly safe for us," said David, pointing at the display screen. "It's mostly just ethanol and capsaicin, or in easy terms, alcohol and hot sauce." Carlos laughed. "You're joking, aren't you?" "Nope, not at all," grinned David, and pointed at a barrel of the stuff with the lid half off. Warning signs plastered all over the barrel. "The stuff starships fly on? Try some." And David handed the plate to him. Carlos took the plate, looked at the wobbling red mass, and cut a piece for himself. He sniffed it, and indeed it did have a familiar scent. He took a small bite and swallowed it with a gasp. "It's like a spicy tequila." Sarah had started watching Tango by herself, knowing Carlos wouldn't have minded, and gone to the part where Rapunzel was singing about being stuck in a tower all day, every day, when she grumbled and went looking. A little while later, she was wandering around looking for Carlos, when, as she walked by the medical ward, she heard a muffled growl. "Why is it spicy?" And then a giggle from behind the door. When she opened the door, she saw both Carlos and David sitting around the barrel of pyrofuel, with spoons of the red gelatin in their hands. Before she could say anything, Carlos stumbled to his feet and shut the door behind her. "You have got to try this stuff," he said, giddy, tears in his eyes. David sat on his stool, alternating from a stupid grin and mouth-breathing long, cool breaths. He had tears streaming down his eyes. After the two men explained poorly what they were actually doing, and that it was in no way dangerous, doubtful, and that the barrel of fuel was actually tasty, spicy alcohol, unlikely, she finally indulged them. What was the worst that could happen? The occult-eye doctor bobbed his head down the hall, his tentacles pulsing a constant yellow and orange. It had just finished a relaxing soak in the hydropods and was going to organise one or two things in the medical lab before ending its day cycle. It stood open the door to his place of work. Both of its jet black eyes pulled forward to fully process the scene in front of him, colour drained from his skin, and all his tentacles fell limp underneath him. All three of the humans were actively poisoning themselves by sitting around and eating engine fuel out of a barrel. While all were apparently inebriated to different degrees, none were spared from sharing running noses, teary eyes and red faces. They should have been dead. David rolled his head limply towards the occult-eye to look up at him. "Hey, Doc, I need some water. Like a lot of water." "Some chips would be nice as well," snickered Carlos, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The occult-eye zipped away as fast as his antigrav could carry it, white tentacles waving behind like a tattered sail. "I don't think he went to get chips," Sarah said sadly. She got up and filled a couple lab beakers with water, and handed them to her thankful David and Carlos. "Stay hydrated, you idiots," and passed around a roll of absorbing pads. "And wipe your faces, you look gross." A short time later, they heard footsteps coming towards them. The door opened, and the occult-eye was floating there with a little more colour, as well as Captain Krenzak and an assortment of the crew standing behind him. "What are you drinking now?" the captain asked worriedly, his large eyes tracking the three humans with the liquid in the beakers. "Oh, just water," said David hastily. He did his best to hide another hiccup. "And what would drive you to start consuming pyrofuel? How are you alive? The amount of toxins in even a small amount is highly dangerous." His mantis head waving his head back and forth, as if seeing them from more angles would make the situation much more sense. "Well, we were bored," said David, "and after 3 months I found something to kill the time." A mumbling of voices was heard from the alien crowd. The occult-eye stuttered a pulse, stark purple lines down his body, and the translator questioned, "You intend to kill time by eating the ship's fuel?" "To pass the time," said Sarah hastily. "Us humans get restless without outward stimulation. I agree this looks crazy, but we will be perfectly fine." "David will probably have a headache. Sarah and I might as well. None of us have stopped by a bar in a while," said Carlos lightly, and took another small bite of his red Jello. "What can I say? We are deaf welders." The captain still looked quite anxious, rubbing the carapace of his arms together. "I cannot condone this behaviour." At that moment, the warning lights went on, and the whining pitch of sirens went off. All three of the humans shot up and sobered their faces. This was serious. Captain Krenzak chirped into his communicator. "Helmsman, report now." "Two Warutteri attack vessels just pulled out from behind a large asteroid," the helmsman replied. 250 meters out, closing fast." Krenzak turned and yelled at the crew. "Get the plasma pistols from the armory." A large, four-armed blue brute of an alien, with the face of a smashed warthog, bellowed out, "Security, all hands, get the big guns!" The crowd dispersed in a flurry of controlled panic, the captain to the bridge and others splitting up to get armed and prepare for boarders. The soft thump, thump, thump of the anti-boarding plasma launchers reverberated through the hall as the humans followed the aliens. As they were jogging down the corridor, Sarah turned towards Carlos and pointed at the plate of red goop. "Why do you still have that?" she asked. Carlos shrugged as he held it in one hand, as they made their way down the long hallway that paralleled the hull of the ship. They were approaching the small crowd in front of a weapon depot, as the big blue alien was handing out guns when another alarm eclipsed the first. "Brace for impact! Brace for impact!" A massive crash of hull and hull, and then the sound of tearing metal, and for a split second the port side wall indented inwards before a boarding spike ripped into the hallway. And then the spike opened. Carlos was an open-minded individual. You had to be to travel in space. You see lots of different types of aliens and cultures. But what burst through the spike was the ugliest thing he had seen in a long while. It looked like a big bird in stature and built, if not a little smaller. It had the face of a vulture, and its grey, greasy feathers across its body seemed to have a bad case of alopecia, and it revealed the pulped grey, grimy skin underneath. It held a large laser rifle and had utility belts wrapped around itself. As it turned to fire at the crowd, Carlos instinctively threw the plate of pyro fuel at it. It seemed to stop in shock as it looked down at the red goo dripping down its feathers. There was a second of silence as the next alien started to make his way out of the spike, and that's when someone from the defending group shot it with a plasma pistol. Apparently when pyrofuel is introduced to a plasma shot, even as weak as a shot from a pistol, it still has remarkable effects. Like napalm and white phosphorus, all at once, the Voltan pirate went up in a flash of white burning heat, as it gave a single screech and flayed its feathered arms around, and tried to make it back into the spike, but smashed into his comrade, who had just exited the spike. The greasy feathers of the second one caught fire too, and also turned back to retreat into the spike. From inside the spike's tube, squawks of frustration turned to horror and pain, as black smoke started to fill the hallway. The first Voltan was burning crisp at the entrance of the spike. Nasty black smoke rose from his corpse as the ship's defenders took position around the entrance, holding aim at the smoking hole. Carlos just stood there as Sarah and David quickly grabbed a couple of pistols from their crewmates. "I have an idea," he said, and ran back the way they came. "What are you doing?" cried out Sarah, as she took up position along with the others. "I'll be right back," he called, as he sprinted down the hall. The Voltan were not ones to back off so easily, even if their advantage of surprise was gone, and angry squawking could be heard from down the spike. One crewmate poked his head down the spike's tube, and 2 or 3 plasma bolts shot past as he quickly pulled his head back. A few shots were returned down the way. A stalemate was held as they traded shots back and forth down the tube. A minute or so went by, and Carlos came pounding down the hall again, with the barrel of slightly used pyrofuel. Everyone's eyes grew wide, and David asked, "What are you planning to do with that?" "If this is what they're here to steal, might as well give it to them," said Carlos proudly. "Make sure their beaks are down. Don't want to get shot holding this." He hefted the barrel in his arms with a grunt. The reduced gravity on the ship was helpful, but it didn't mean the barrel was light. As the rest of the crew put several plasma shots downrange, Carlos positioned him, and took a couple of steps forward and hurled the barrel down the tube. The barrel's lid came loose as it bounced into the Voltan's ship, and covered everything on that side of the tube. Carlos whooped. "Run!" David screamed to the crew, as he jumped up and aimed down the tube and fired a single shot, turned and chased after the rest of his crewmates. A second later, a loud whoosh of hot air hit his back, and a pillar of flame shot out of the tube, and instantly cooked the paint off the opposite wall. More beeping came from the alarm, and David saw the pressure doors coming down in front of him. The crew had already made it past the door, and he dived forward, and made it just in time. Everyone turned to look through the thick window in the door as the edges of where the spike had punctured their craft turned to crumple. And an instant later the spike ripped away, pulling whatever remained in that section of hallway into the void of space. For just a moment you could see the pirate spacecraft floating through the new hole in their ship. It did not look good. A large chunk was missing, and the remaining blackened hull spinning lifelessly away. Occasionally, a gasp of atmosphere would escape from a crack. And then it was gone. The second ship had a bit more luck boarding, and had made a foothold in the ship, but as soon as they heard what had happened to their partners in crime, they made a hasty retreat back into their vessel, and pulled away from the massive cargo ship. Shots from the plasma launcher chasing them the whole way till out of range. An hour later, Captain Krenzak was standing at the helm of his ship, his bridge full of his officers and crewmen. They had just fought off 2 pirate ships with minimal casualties. There were some bumps and bruises, and 2 of the crew that fought the second group of pirate boarders had plasma shot burns, and were under the care of David and the Octopi. Carlos and Sarah were in their vacuum suits inspecting the damaged hull with the swarm of rockets. Not bad at all. Humans, as he now knew firsthand, were everything he had hoped for, and a bit more. He brushed one of his large eyes with an arm. There must be a way to sell the pyrofuel to the humans as a recreational something. They are certainly crazy enough to eat it. He would talk to them about it later. In the meantime, that colony wasn't getting any younger, and they had cargo to deliver.